Costa Rica CAMINO series we just finished, as well as the recent European walking holiday adventures, gave me the idea to do a more comprehensive show on how to prepare for a longer-term adventure. So today we're going to discuss how to get your mind and your body ready, plus I'll give you some unusual tips to consider packing for your longer-term travel that you might not have thought of. Of course, many of today's tips and advice are applicable to all travel. I can't wait to share them with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. We've got a multi-part episode for you today. We're going to talk about the mind, the body, as well as some special tips for longer-term travel. Let's start first with preparing your mind. I have found that the mind is equally and sometimes even more important than the body when it comes to having a successful longer-term trip. So that's where we're going to start today. Longer-term adventures are very different from, say, a week-long one. You can usually do anything difficult for a day or a week, but when you're talking about more than a week, let's say you're doing Europe's El Camino, which can take longer than a month, the mind game becomes super important. Often the trip will become more like work than play. It's hard. It's going to be demanding on your body and your morale, especially when the weather doesn't cooperate or your body hurts. You've heard me talk in the past about Type 1 and Type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is when you're having a blast while you're doing the adventure. However, even the greatest adventure can toss in some Type 2 fun. And this is where you might actually be miserable at the time, and it only becomes fun or often funny in the retelling and the reliving of the story. Examples from trips that I've taken include that day on the West Highland Way when it was just that cold, icy rain and my hands were so frozen. I was just miserable and just completely frozen. When I finally made it to a warm restaurant to get heated up a little bit, my hands were in a claw that I couldn't even hold the toilet paper. It was that cold and that miserable. Just that one day, but that was definitely a Type 2 day. Even the last 4 miles when we were on the Costa Rica CAMINO in the indigenous forest, it was a fantastic day, but it was a long and a very challenging day. And that last 4 miles, definitely Type 2 fun. On a longer term trip, your body may revolt from all the constant stresses you're putting on it. It's going to be tired, you're going to be in pain, and you can be asking yourself over, why on earth am I even doing this? And you're wondering, I paid good money, I gave up my vacation time in order to do this. You're going to have a little birdie on your shoulder that's going to taunt you to quit. Say, oh, just quit. Why bother? Just go ahead. Call it a day. Call it a hike. Go find something fun and cozy to do. You're going to look for all sorts of reasons to agree with that little birdie. And you'll have so many hours that will allow that little birdie to convince you to give up and seek that warm, cozy, dry shelter. But you don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So how can we prepare our mind? Number one, super important. And also, a lot of these things, they work not just in adventures and long-term trips, they work in your daily life too, which is one of the reasons that I love adventure travel, because a lot of the skills that we pick up by doing these trips, we can transfer into our everyday lives. So to prepare our mind, the number one thing I think you need to do is set goals. Yes, you have your larger term goal of accomplishing whatever the adventure is, whether it's climbing Machu Picchu or Kilimanjaro or doing the El Camino. But I've found when goals are so big, it's very helpful to break these goals down in much smaller, manageable chunks so you have a series of wins. You want to get those victories. And as long as you're moving towards your goal, however slowly, you're eventually going to get there. One of my favorite sayings is, how do you eat an elephant? The answer, one bite at a time. And add in some rewards. Let's say I'm training for something and I do interval training once a week. And so I go to my local rails to trails and I can see the benefits that this interval training does for my body, but I absolutely hate it. I hate running and I really hate how I do these intervals, which is you warm up for it's like 5 minutes and then I run as fast and as hard as I can push my body for 1 minute and then I walk recover for 2 minutes. And I repeat that 10 times. And it's awful. I absolutely hate it. So what I do to make it more manageable, to get the little wins, is after each round, I do the math. So the first set, 10% done. That doesn't sound so good, but it sounds, I'm making some progress. After the third round, I'm almost a third of the way through. Round 5 gets me halfway there, 50%. Oh, I've already got 50%. I can do another 50%. Do a couple more rounds. Now I'm almost 3/4 of the way through. One more round. Now it's the home stretch. I see the finish line. And eventually I have eaten that elephant. And I mentioned rewards. So for me, I'm going to go back to training again. The 2 things I hate training are doing these intervals and also doing boring stairs for about 30 minutes. So on these days, I try to schedule something fun that I only get to do if I do my training exercises. So I get a little reward. Maybe, okay, you did 30 minutes of stairs, go to the movies this afternoon. Go get your nails done. Do some little treat that you only get if you do the hard thing you don't want to do. Let's say you're doing a challenging hike. You can do the same thing, but since you're talking about an even longer time frame, you might need to break these goals down into even smaller chunks. Like when I get to the top of that mountain, I can have a snack break and take my shoes off for a little bit and let my feet breathe. And when it gets really hard, a particular mountain summit might be too hard to even try to wrap your brain around. It might be, if I make it to that rock up there that may be 50 meters up, I can take a break. So set your goal so you know you can do it. And whatever and however small those chunks are, that's fine, because eventually you're going to eat the elephant. The second thing I recommend is to remember your why. What was it that made you choose to do this in the first place? Sometimes for me, it's just because I want to see if I can make myself do it. I get a little bit of a perverse pleasure into tackling something I know is going to be difficult, and then I don't want to let myself down. I know that scrap the if. I know that when I complete whatever it is I signed up for, that I'm going to be super proud of myself, and I love how it builds my self-esteem. So remind yourself how proud you're going to be when you have accomplished your goal. Visualize your success in as much detail as possible to rewire that monkey brain of yours. Number 3, remember your sense of humor. When the gods are against you, sometimes you just have to laugh and yell, "Bring it on!" Remember in Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan's up on the mast just cursing at the weather. Conjure up your inner Lieutenant Dan. There's something in that defiance that gives you a pissed off jolt of endurance. Is that all you got? Just some cold icy rain? Give me some deer flies. Bring on the midges. Bring it on. I got this. And remember, one day this will be funny. And as a corollary, being able to reframe your mind is a powerful tool. Abraham Lincoln famously said that people are about as happy as they make up their mind to be. If you decide, and note the choice of the word decide, to be miserable, you most certainly will be. But if you decide to reframe your mind to I'll show you, now you're tackling things from a position of strength. Never forget that you are in charge of your mind, and no one but you can tell your brain how to react to any circumstance. This is called cognitive restructuring, and it's a powerful tool not just on longer-term travel and hard challenges, but everyday life. I did a full show on my companion podcast, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, on how to build resilience and grit. I encourage you to take a listen and to visit the website. It's been a really popular episode and has lots more insights on how you can build this essential skill, not just for adventure, like I was saying, but in your everyday life. Of course, I'll put a link in the show notes. So we've worked on our mental game. Now let's look at getting our body ready. I've asked Becky Rupp, my friend and affiliate of Trailblazer Wellness, to come back on the program for a deep dive. So Becky, I brought you back on because we've been talking a lot this summer about long-term travel, like doing the Costa Rica CAMINO and doing European walking holidays and such. And so I wanted to get you on to ask you, how does training for a long-term adventure differ from, say, training just, say, for a week-long, whatever you're going to be doing kind of a thing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And we, a lot of times people just have a limited amount of time and they just go off for a week, and they pretty much, you can do kind of anything for a week, right? You can survive and get by and push through. But when you get into like a multi-week kind of situation, the dynamics are a little different, right? So basically, I would see a lot of the logistics of training are very similar. So you're going to want to put in the miles, going to want to do the strength training. But one of the biggest differences is mental. So that is something that, you just can prepare as best you can by, again, just being dedicated to your training plan and seeing it as an extension of your trip and a preview of your trip. I mean, it always is, even when it's a shorter adventure, but really getting into that mindset when you're doing the training as if, hey, I'm there, I'm doing it, I'm getting up, and this is a part of my day. This is an important part of what I'm doing at this point in time. So that can kind of help you get in the mental game. The other thing that becomes, I think, more important to be mindful about is like your clothing and your gear. And I don't know if you found this to be true, Kit, but for me, it has been that, again, when you're on a shorter trip, you can just kind of power through and make do with what you got. But when you're on a longer trip and day after day, you're pulling those things out of your bag or your pack, carrying it on your back, even if you're just carrying a day pack, every ounce counts. And the comfort counts for your clothes. And if it rubs the wrong way, or if it's just irritating you in some way, as the days and weeks go by, like chances are it's not going to get better. So you really want to have your clothing and your gear dialed in and practice with it in advance. So when you're training for this longer trip, buy your stuff in advance and try it out and really be thoughtful and think about, is that rubbing me the wrong way? Is that something that's really going to annoy me after day 8, 9, 10, 11? Are these shoes really working for me day after day? And I think those are a couple of things that you can do. Just, again, have that mindset that this training is really a part of your trip, and then really think about and be mindful of what you take with you.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the gear too, because you can get away with a shirt that maybe it works all right, but I think this is the time that you should probably step up and get the better quality performance gear, so that's one thing you don't have to worry about.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to get top of the line stuff. It just has to work for you.
Right.
Everybody's different. I mean, you can spend a lot of money on gear. Look at secondhand clothing stores,
Right.
I have a friend who just bought a great pair of mountain bike shorts off of Poshmark. I always thought Poshmark was designer bags and stuff, but there's some different options out there for getting things at a less expensive price. But really, the most important thing is that it fits you well, that the seams don't rub, all those little things that, again, on a week-long trip you can get through, but for the longer term, you really want to have what works well.
Excellent. And I guess we should go back a little bit and let me ask you, why is it so important to train before these things? Like what goes wrong, or what problems can you have if you don't? And I have had experience of not doing it, so I already know.
Yeah. Well, everybody's different. Some people can just, I don't know. I hear stories and see people say, oh, I didn't train for blah, 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 and had a great time. But, I think it just, it always, with my clients, I see it helps their strength, their stamina, their energy, and their confidence. So go into that trip, knowing, pretty well that you can handle it. You can handle just about anything. And instead of focusing on, gosh, can I make it through the day? Am I holding everybody up? Am I going to be able to do it again the next day? You have that peace of mind and that confidence that, yeah, I've put in the effort to make this a really great trip, and I can focus on the scenery. I can focus on, the people that I'm meeting, the food I'm having, maybe stay up later at night and chat with people, or I can have enough energy to write in my journal, whatever's important to you. So I like to focus on what are the positive things that people can get out of the training. But yeah, certainly I've also seen and experienced to some extent the lack of preparation just can make for a little bit of misery and potential for injury too, which is, not to be discounted. You get through the trip, but you go away and you have a lingering injury that's going to affect you, when you get back home and stuff too.
Right. And I think it also would make the trip more likely to be type 1 fun, where it's fun at the time, versus type 2 fun.
Yeah.
Not a lot in the show, because you want it to be fun. That's one of the reasons you're doing it. But
absolutely.
The longer term ones are work. They're not always fun. Sometimes they are really, really hard. And it's, we talked about before, it's a big mental game as well. So,
absolutely.
So when we're training and you're developing a training regimen, what are the key areas that we need to think about?
Yeah, I think one of the most maybe overlooked things is the conditions that you'll be encountering. It's easy to look at a trip itinerary and be like, oh, it's this many miles, and it maybe sometimes it'll have an elevation change information like, oh, you're going to be gaining, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet of elevation gain. Well, for one thing, is that net, or is that like, is that the total, or is that from point A to point B, or does that include all the up and downs in between, right? So you start at, say, 3,000 feet, you end at 5,000 feet. Well, it's only 2,000 feet of elevation gain. Well, there can be a lot of ups and downs in between. So finding out a little bit more about the conditions, is it going to be a lot of undulating terrain? Is it rocky? Are there other kinds of things that are challenges that you can anticipate and potentially train for? I have a friend who's doing the Grand Teton later this month. And so that includes some scrambling and some rock and exposure that she hadn't had a lot of experience with. So we've been going out and doing some 14ers and doing some scrambling stuff to get her comfort zone a little bit higher on that. So distance and elevation change can be a helpful first step and first start, but planning for those conditions and simulating as much of those as possible without going too overboard, but at least getting some level of comfort of those elements that could be difficult for you can be helpful.
And it's not just the conditions, say, of the trail or whatever, but it's also
Right.
the weather. We ran into that
Yeah.
in the Costa Rica Camino. It was hot and humid. And that
Yeah.
kind of knocked a lot of us for a loop because it made it so much harder to do. So are there ways that you can train for the elements, whether it's heat and humidity or cold or rain or snow or all of the above, sometimes in some places all in the same day?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's really tricky, right? I mean, in an ideal world, maybe you can get up and go and travel and spend some time in these different places and these different environments that you might encounter. But do it as much as possible, but you don't have to obsess about it. I mean, be aware, and just that's again where like gear can be, and clothing in particular can be really, really meaningful and have a big impact on your trip. From a training perspective, though, basically what I advise people is, when it's a crappy day outside and you don't want to go out and do your training, go out and do your training, because that's gonna, that's gonna, like, even if it's not the exact same conditions as you're expecting, it just builds your resilience, your mental and your physical resilience to dealing with different kinds of things instead of just always that perfect sunny, perfect temperature day, no rain, no snow, no whatever. I mean, I've had clients who were training in the winter in Minnesota and minus 10 degrees out. And of course, don't, put yourself at risk. But, no, I always want people to be safe, but, bundle up and just figure it out. Don't go too far from home, but at least get out there and test your mental toughness as well as your gear.
Yeah, and that reminds me, when I was trying to learn how to backpack, I made myself Tuesday night, I had to camp in the backyard. So no matter what the weather was, I had to set the tent in whatever the weather was and sleep there that night. And it was just Tuesday, no matter how yucky it was. And so you can do the same thing with your training as well.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. Any random Tuesday, it could be great or awful. And that's what you're going to encounter if you're out for more than a day or two.
Right. And in the past, we did an episode on training for altitude, and I'll link to that in the show notes. Can you just kind of give us a quick synopsis that we'll just tack onto this program?
Yeah, absolutely. So improving your fitness, it's not a guarantee against altitude sickness, but when you improve your fitness, you improve your body's efficiency in using oxygen. And when you're at higher altitude, you have less oxygen to work with. So the more efficient you are, the better off you are. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it does improve your chances. So things you can do to push your heart rate a little bit. You don't have to go crazy with a bunch of high intensity interval training, but just pushing your heart rate enough so that it's a good effort for a sustained amount of time will help your heart and your body adapt to that kind of pressure to perform when you're feeling pressed and taxed. There are some breathing exercises that you can do. I think you talked about that in particular, to kind of maximize the use of oxygen, especially at higher elevation. Go higher, go to a high altitude place if you can, just to at least see how you react. And then the biggest thing is to arrive as early as you can and get that physical adaptation process started before you're going through physical effort. Those are some of the biggies.
Cool. Well, speaking about adaptation, what do
Mhm.
you do or what can you do when your local terrain is nothing like what you're going to encounter? Let's say I'm still living in Eastern North Carolina where it's flat, 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 and I want to climb Kilimanjaro. What kind of things can we do to, I know we can't simulate anything, but that we can do when it's just completely different?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you just have to get creative, quite honestly. And I have a blog post on training for like a high altitude trek when you're living in the flats or high elevation change. You just have to get creative, make friends with your favorite, even little hill, stairs, stadium stairs, all kinds of things that you can do to just kind of at least put your body through some simulation, even if it's, not exact, to get that training benefit and get yourself just ready as much as you can. We can't fly around the world and do the adventures before the adventure, right? So, so you just have to make do with what you've got. And I know, like for Costa Rica, I think you had a couple of folks on that who are from Florida, and they were probably more used to the heat and humidity, but they certainly didn't have all the hills and mountains like you had in Costa Rica. And you just walk some sand dunes and find some kind of hill, and maybe take some weekend trips and get over to a place where you can do a little bit more challenging stuff.
Cool. And send me a link to that blog post and I'll put it on the show notes.
Absolutely, will do.
So, all right, we're all gung ho and can we overtrain?
Absolutely. I think you learned this lesson, right, Kit?
I'm working on it.
Yeah, I know. And this is kind of something I watch for my clients. But the way I set up plans, I try to set them up so they don't overtrain. But when you're doing it on your own, it can be really tempting to just go, right? Be like, more is better. I just need to go out there and crank it all the time. But as a personal trainer, that's one of the things I learned was that the rest period is really important as well. And you can even have a week-long light week or rest week that will help your body actually with the adaptation. It's called periodization for the fancy term. But yeah, you could definitely overtrain. And some of those signs of that, just if anybody's like thinking maybe I am overtraining. If you use a heart rate monitor and you track your resting heart rate, you might see it actually rise. Now, usually when you're training, your resting heart rate drops as you get fitter. But when you're overtraining, your resting heart rate actually goes up. But if you don't have to do that, you don't have to track your heart rate. But just if you notice fatigue, like your normal, maybe you go out for a 4 or 5 mile hike and you're just like, you're tired at the end of it. And you're not usually tired after, that shorter hike. That can be a sign that you're overtraining. If aches and pains that don't go away, that nagging, this, that, or the other thing can definitely be a sign that you're overtraining and that you need to rest. I build periodization or rest times into training plans, but most people end up kind of hitting it naturally. They have something come up, or maybe they have some kind of injury and they just have to take a break. Or as you experience, like your body will tell you, it's time to take a break. Unfortunately, sometimes we push it too hard and it's a forced break. It's better to have a planned break or an intentional break if you can.
Definitely. So are there any like go-to exercises that no matter what the physical adventure you're going on that we should be working on to make sure that it's strong, whether it's the core or balance or something like that?
Yeah, I definitely incorporate full body training, strength training, in pretty much all my training plans because, you're out adventuring and those are full body experiences, right? So you definitely want to have a strong core. Whatever core exercises work best for you. I usually include some kind of, holding a plank kind of thing or holding a bear pose or something to get your core going, some kind of twisting of core movement to engage the obliques. Because again, as we're hiking and paddling and stuff, like we're twisting and moving in all different directions. And the core is really, it's the core, right? It's the center of so much of that activity. People who do Pilates just have super, super strong core, and it really serves them well. Squats and lunges are just classic. They're simple, they're easy to do, and they work those big muscles that help support you and give you that strength and stamina to keep going. And I also, I definitely appreciate and, for many things, want to see my people do some upper body strength training because that can get neglected sometimes. And again, adventuring is a full body experience, especially if you're paddling. Obviously, you need some upper body stuff. And good old fashioned push-ups, they do the trick. It's, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be an hour at the gym, pushing and pulling all these weights and stuff. You can keep it fairly simple. And I'd rather have you do something simple and effective than, nothing at all.
Gotcha. And you also are able to work with people to use whatever equipment or you take a look at their situations. You don't have to belong to a gym. You often use the body and all that. So that's one of the good things that Becky's is good at doing, folks.
Yeah.
Another big thing is how far in advance should we start thinking about training? Because we know life's going to get in the way, but is there some rule of thumb that, oh boy, you best be on board and start doing something now? Or how do we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it's kind of an equation that involves your trip difficulty and your current activity level. I did have a client who contacted me 6 weeks before Kilimanjaro, and she was doing some hiking and stuff, but that was cutting it a little close for the level of activity that she currently had, and we did the best we could, and she had a great trip. But I usually would say, as soon as you book your trip, or when you're thinking about booking your trip, if you don't have an absolute time frame locked in, just kind of consider my rule of thumb for ramping up training is 10 to 20% total miles per week, adding that amount per week. And without doing a lot of crazy math, I mean, you can see that if you're currently walking 3 miles, maybe 3 miles a day, 3 days a week, you're doing 9 miles and your trip is like 40 miles in a week, that's a pretty big delta. So you need to allow time to put that together. I also have a blog post on this because it is a really common question. So I'll send you the link to that so people can dig in a little more.
Perfect. You alleged earlier about sometimes life gets in the way of training. So what kind of tips would you give if you somebody gets injured while they're training for a trip or something gets in the way and you miss a significant chunk? Are there any ways to play catch up without re-injuring yourself?
Yeah, I think that's really the key, and the delicate balance that to strike is not rushing it. Like, it kind of depends where that gap of time falls relative to when your trip is. On the one hand, if you've been training for 3 or 4 months and you're within a month of your trip and you have to take a couple of weeks off, injuries are different than life things. Injuries, you definitely have to get with your doctor and that's a whole different thing. But if you just have to things get crazy at work, or you have some kind of family situation and you have to take a week or 2 off, but you've been training for a long time, you're not going to lose all that training. You've built up a really good foundation. So you can hang for a couple of weeks and then just get back in slowly and gradually. If it's early, on the flip side, is if it's several months before your trip, then you can just ease back into it and get back on track. And, you just do the best you can. And again, if it's an injury situation, you definitely want to consult with your doctor, your physical therapist, to see what's realistic and what you can do that is not going to re-injure yourself. The worst thing you can do is just jump back in where you left off, because that is a recipe for re-injury or just getting into a situation where you're kind of over your head. So yeah, take a few steps back, get back in gradually, start a few weeks back from where you were, or even a month back from where you were, and just trust that you'll be able to, you'll probably be able to get by.
Cool. And that's another good reason to buy travel insurance, because that would cover you if all of a sudden you're unable to do something. And
absolutely.
I'll link, of course, my travel insurance link in the show notes, and I'd appreciate y'all using my links. We've covered a lot today. What other things do you think we need to be thinking about when it comes to training for a longer term adventure that I may not have thought to ask you?
I think mainly just, be patient and kind with yourself, and both in your training and on the trip, and be flexible. Like, as much as you can. Like, we did the Camino de Santiago, the Portuguese route earlier this year. And, we didn't end up having to change our itinerary, but, if you're on an itinerary where you can make a change, you can take a ride if you need it. You can do less than you originally had planned on. If you're not feeling well, just do it. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't go exactly as you originally thought. You want to have a great experience. And if you push it, and have a miserable time, then what's the point, right? So be kind to yourself and be flexible and make the best of it.
So if people want to call you and Trailblazer Wellness and maybe come up with an idea, tell us a little bit about how that works and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a certified personal trainer. I'm also a certified health and wellness coach, though I call myself an adventure coach because that's a lot more fun and interesting. And that's really what I do. I help people get ready for their adventures. And I do that both through a customized personal training plan as well as coaching. So the coaching sessions are usually either weekly or every other week, or, pretty flexible with that cadence. But the coaching really helps support people in working through some of these things that we talked about on the show today, dealing with injuries, things coming up, overtraining, undertraining, gear. I talk to clients about gear as well. So whatever it is, you can just kind of troubleshoot and have someone there by your side to help guide you through it, help you think through things, help you troubleshoot, help brainstorm, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I do. And I'm at trailblazerwellness.com. Very simple. I have an Instagram account, Trailblazer Wellness, Facebook page, Trailblazer Wellness. All pretty straightforward. So
I'll put links to all that in the show notes as well. And you don't have to live in Colorado, right? You can do this from anywhere in the world.
Yes. Anywhere in the world. Yes. Time zones can be a challenge, but yeah, we do it virtually. So I give you your training plan. I provide videos. I can do a video workout with you if that's something that would feel more comfortable with. But I do all my sessions via Zooms, but we can do phone if that works better. And it's your time to work through whatever you want to work through and adjust the plan as needed, but all virtual.
Cool. Well, I'm going to put links to all of Becky's stuff and contact information in the show notes. And be sure to tell her that I sent you, because she'll give you an exclusive 10% discount. So make sure you get your discount. And
absolutely.
Well, Becky, I really appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely, Kit. Anytime. And if there's anything else you want to know about or add, just let me know.
So while we've got our mind and body ready for this trip, now let's talk about some things to consider packing for longer term travel. Now, I certainly don't want you to overpack, and I encourage you to pack as lightly as possible. There are things that you can delay and wait till you get home on some of the shorter trips. But on longer trips, there are some things, and this is mainly to do with like laundry kinds of things, that having a couple of these little lightweight accessories can make your life a lot easier and more convenient. So that's what we're going to focus on now. When you book with an adventure tour company, usually they're going to give you a general packing list. And of course, each adventure and climate is going to have some specific needs. I'm going to be talking about some of the things that you may not think to bring. So now we're not going to be talking about the details. Bring a puffy jacket, bring a rain jacket. I'm going to be talking more about the things you may not think about bringing, but which you're going to find super helpful. On the website and in the show notes, I have a lot more detailed lists of good packing lists that you can use as a checklist to make sure you don't forget anything important. And newsletter subscribers will get access to the printer-friendly list. So if you haven't signed up, click the link on the description if you're listening from your phone or a pad right now, or just go to activetraveladventures.com and hit the contact, newsletter, any of those buttons. It all comes to me. I only send you one email a month, so there's no spam, and you can unsubscribe anytime. But newsletter subscribers have access to all the travel planners and all of the many, many downloads and checklists that I've put together over the last 5 years. Speaking of which, I've just celebrated my 5-year anniversary of the Active Travel Adventures podcast. Can't believe it. 5 years has gone by. It's gone so fast. Anyway, Let's get back to some of the odd packing items you may want to consider for long-term travel. I want to give a shout out to a couple of fellow listeners who have shown me some of these tips we've traveled together the last year or so. And get a little wiser with each adventure. From Noma, who you met in the Dolomites and Slovenia episode, I learned about several cool lightweight travel helpers. Noma is the travel gadget geek. She has researched and done all sorts of things, and on the trip she brought some really cool things I want to share with you. Because laundry is one of the big bugaboos. Going to the laundromat's a pain. Sending it if you're at a hotel is extremely expensive. So when you're on the road for a while, laundry is going to be an issue. I tend to wash my shirts and my delicates in the sink and only go to the laundromat whenever my pants and everything just needs a good, solid, proper wash. So here are some of the tips I learned from Noma. Number 1, pack a few balloons. Why? Because when you need to dry something quickly, let's say you need a shirt that you just washed out, you blow up the balloon and drape your wrung out shirt over it so that the balloon becomes like the body that the shirt goes on, and now it has all sides exposed to the air and it dries so much quicker. And then Noma, number 2, also found a super lightweight drying clothesline that uses the tension between these teeny balls that pull the clothes together and acts like clothespins to hold them up. And it's super lightweight. It can't even weigh an ounce or so. And I'm going to have links to all these in the show notes so you can see what I'm talking about. And speaking of links, I would appreciate you using my Amazon links, as I get credit for anything you buy from Amazon if you enter the Amazon site via one of my links. It does make a difference if you go on the clothesline and you end up buying dog food. I get credit for anything you buy when you use my link, whether or not it's what you went to the website with. I don't get a large commission, but there's a lot of you out there, and every little bit helps to help try to cover some of the costs of running this show, and it'll be much appreciated. In fact, can I ask you to bookmark my Amazon link and use it? I would really appreciate it. Thank you. So Noma's second great tip was the lightweight clothesline that is a must-have. Take that on all your trips. It's super cool. And then you may already know about this one, but it was new to me. Noma also introduced me to laundry sheets. I used to pack a zip bag with some laundry powder. I was worried about bringing the pods in case it exploded and got sticky all over everything. So she showed me these laundry sheets that are dehydrated soap sheets that look like a dryer sheet. Really lightweight, they're mess free, they are perfect. Again, you go to a laundromat, you're going to pay a fortune for the soap at the little machines. So bring in however many times you think you're going to go to the laundromat, bring some of those sheets and you're good to go. The fourth thing that I learned from Noma is to bring on, and you would use this on a longer trip, a water bladder dryer. These are like long rectangular felt things that go in your water bladder, because you can go for, I have gone a couple of weeks without washing my water bladder, but if I'm going longer than that, I want to clean it and dry it out, make sure I don't have any algae or bacteria in there, but it's really hard to dry those out anyway. So these are great not just for travel, they're great for any time you want to clean out your water bladder, and it's a great little investment. They don't even cost that much. In fact, I don't think anything I've got in here is very expensive, but they're super helpful for solving the problems that they're designed for. Another tip I learned on the Costa Rica CAMINO was from Sharon. I sometimes pack a collapsible umbrella, and depending on what the climate is where I'm going, and I found the umbrella is not just for the rain. They also make great sun parasols, as I learned on the Costa Rica CAMINO. Sharon one-upped me, and Sharon, you met her from the Slovenia episode, and she also came to Costa Rica, obviously, because that's where I learned it. She one-upped my small umbrella and brought a hands-free solar shade umbrella that not only reflects the heat, it attaches directly to your day pack or your backpack, so you have hands-free hiking. We can usually take the sun for a few days, but if you're hiking exposed day after day after day in the heat of the summer, consider packing one of these umbrellas. And if you're paddling, they also make one that attaches to your body, and that might be worth checking out as well. It makes a huge difference to block that sun. Much more than a hat. But I have some of my own finds I want to share with you as well, in addition to the ones that we learned from Noma and Sharon. Something I brought on the Costa Rica Camino that I had had for a few years and just never thought to bring it, or I was like, that probably doesn't work. I don't know why I bought it, but I was like, yeah, it's going to be pretty hot down there, so I brought it. It's called a cooling neck gaiter. And this uses a high-tech fabric that when you wet it, it drops the temperature 30 degrees. So can you imagine what that's like when you're out in the 90-degree temperature and you're dying and you drench that thing? You wrap that around your neck and it makes you feel so much better. It'll make a huge difference in your comfort. And as an aside, I always twist and wrap a bandana around my wrist to use as a sweat rag. But on the Camino, when I got really hot, I wet it down and I wore it like a crown around my head, and it helped keep my head a little bit cooler, especially when I combined that with the umbrella. I might look ridiculous, but I didn't care. It felt much better. Another small item I pack is a small mesh, it's like a little laundry bag. I use it to hold all my electronics and cords and such like that as I'm traveling, but that mesh bag doubles as my washing machine delicate washing bag. In addition, you know me, I always pack an emergency kit. I modify its contents depending on the risk of wherever it is that I'm going. But the one thing I always make sure I include, even if I'm not going on an adventure, is a headlamp. That can come in very handy. But here's a tip. Put the batteries in backwards so you don't accidentally turn it on. If you don't want the weight of an extra set of batteries, make sure you're at least starting with fresh batteries before you go. And I also always pack a heat blanket as well. These are the Mylar blankets that come packed. They look like about the size of a deck of cards. And it could save your life if you're in the cold and you get wet, or even in somewhat cold weather, 40-degree weather. If you get wet, you can suffer from hypothermia. Always, I just like to put a plug to always keep one of those in your bag. It could be really important to you one day. Another little odd thing that I pack, even if I'm not hiking, if I'm going to be on a plane for a long period of time, in particular, my knees seem to swell up. I get like a pressure on them. Or if I'm doing a lot of hiking, but I don't want to bring heavy-duty knee braces for support, just go to the dollar store and get those cheap, they're blue, the ones I've been buying are blue elastic wraps that go around your knees. They give you just that little bit of extra support that helps take that pressure off. They don't weigh anything. They dry out easy, and I don't find them irritating even when it's hot, but I found them really, really helpful. And another little item is don't forget to bring SPF lip balm. I found it really hard to find lip balm with sunscreen in it while I've been on the road. So pack 1 or 2 of those in your pack as well. Have you discovered a cool lightweight travel helper that we may not know about? Email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and let me know. I know we had a packed show today, and I hope you got a lot of great information out of it. We looked at strengthening your mind for longer-term travel, how to prepare your body for long-term travel, and finally some cool accessories that make your long-term travel a bit more comfortable and easier. As always, I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!